I, a 30-years-old female, divorced my ex-husband, a 36-years-old male, because of my mother-in-law, a female in her 60s, and suddenly, all of a sudden, he wants back in. My ex and I were married for well over 5 years and had been together for a decade. From the very beginning, his mother was a nightmare. She wasn't just difficult or overbearing, she was downright malicious. She would spend her time belittling me, humiliating me at every chance she got. She constantly undermined my decisions, made snide comments about everything I did, and made me feel like I was unworthy of being a part of their family. I endured all of this because I loved my husband. I didn't want to force him to choose between her and me, but that's exactly what she was pushing me to do. Every time she crossed a line, I would tell my husband, and he would brush it off, saying that his mother was just being a loving, overprotective mom. He refused to acknowledge how toxic and damaging her behavior was. When she made racist comments about my Hispanic background, he laughed it off and excused her behavior. When she called me a gold digger, despite the fact that I made more money than him, he'd just say, "Oh, Mom." He was a grown man who couldn't stand up to his own mother, and it hurt me deeply. And whenever I would stand up for myself and challenge her, he'd get upset and say I was making things worse. He would never back me up. But the final straw came when we had our daughter. That's when my mother-in-law started stepping into my territory in ways that I couldn't ignore. She was constantly undermining my parenting decisions, criticizing how I raised our child, and even trying to take over. My daughter has an irritable colon and can't tolerate any oils or artificial substances. I was very careful with her diet, but my mother-in-law took it upon herself to feed my 3-year-old essential oils, something she had no business doing. She wasn't anti-vaccine or overtly dangerous, but she was incredibly misguided and reckless with her actions. That one act, feeding my daughter essential oils, landed her in the ICU. That was the moment I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted my husband, telling him what his mother had done. He replied that she only did what she thought was best for our daughter. I was furious. How could he dismiss something so serious? That's when I knew I had to take action. I left, went to my parents, and began drafting the divorce agreement. I couldn't be with someone who wouldn't protect me or our child from the toxicity of his mother. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying in the marriage wasn't healthy for any of us. My ex didn't understand why I was doing it, and his reaction was like the Pikachu meme, completely clueless. To him, everything was fine. We were happy in his eyes, and he couldn't fathom why I would end things. A year passed, and my life turned into a nightmare. My ex's mother pulled out every dirty trick she could think of to try to take my daughter away from me. She accused my brother of molesting her, accused me of neglecting our daughter, even accused me of being a drug addict and leaving drugs in reach of a toddler. I take thyroid medication. The accusations were absurd and baseless, but they were relentless. She also accused me of endangering our daughter by allowing random men into my home. It was all lies, but I had to fight to prove that she was unfit to be around our daughter. Meanwhile, my ex kept justifying his mother's behavior. He'd say, "You broke my heart," and that I needed to understand that his mother only wanted what was best for him. My ex wasn't a bad person, but he was completely blind to how damaging his mother's behavior was. Fortunately, I had a strong legal team and was awarded full-time custody of my daughter, with only weekend visitation for my ex. The court acknowledged that my daughter's safety had been compromised because of my mother-in-law's actions. I also couldn't ignore the fact that my relationship with my ex had grown so cold and distant. I had to accept that we were never going to reconcile. Two things brought everything to a head. First, my ex-brother-in-law married an African-American woman, and, of course, my ex-mother-in-law lost it. Her racism and intolerance were exposed for what they were. Meanwhile, I started dating again. My brother-in-law was an incredible guy. He actually stood up for his wife when my ex's mother tried to belittle her. It was something I'd never experienced in my marriage. My ex never stood up for me in the way my brother-in-law stood up for his wife, and that realization started to hit my ex hard. I stayed in touch with my brother-in-law because despite everything, we were friends, and he had often been a mediator between my ex and me. Seeing his brother's marriage made my ex realize how badly his mum had treated me and how his own failure to confront her had damaged our relationship. It opened his eyes to the way his mother had treated me, the same way she treated his brother's wife. I think that was when the light finally flickered on for him. It made him see how wrong he had been. The guy I started seeing was a breath of fresh air. He treated me like a human being, something I hadn't felt in years. His family was normal, and his mother was warm, welcoming, and kind. She immediately made me feel like part of her family, which was such a stark contrast to my ex's mother. I even met my boyfriend's parents, and they welcomed me with open arms. It was everything I had wanted but never received from my ex's side of the family. My ex found out through a mutual friend about my new relationship, and that's when things took a bizarre turn. Suddenly, I started receiving flowers and chocolates. I don't even like chocolate, by the way, from him. He began sending me cards, text messages filled with hearts, and all these grandiose gestures as if trying to win me back. Then one day, my ex showed up at my door, crying, clutching my old engagement ring, begging me to come back. I was caught off guard at first, but I knew in my heart that it was over. I told him no, and that he needed to leave. He refused. He demanded that I come out to talk to him, and when my boyfriend told him he'd call the police, my ex threatened to beat him up. It was pathetic, honestly. I shut the door and went back inside, letting him stew in his own foolishness. The next day, my daughter returned from a trip with her father and asked, "Do you love him more than me?" My heart sank. I had already told her that my love for her was infinite, but I realized that my ex was subtly trying to manipulate her and make her hate me. I was at a loss for what to do. I would never use my daughter as a weapon, but I knew he was trying to twist her perception of me. I immediately called my lawyer and asked for guidance. We worked with a social worker to talk to my daughter and get to the bottom of things. I was heartbroken, knowing that my ex was trying to make my daughter feel torn between us. But things got worse. My ex had been showing my daughter pictures of houses and telling her that I would now have 2 rooms with loads of stuff. When I asked my daughter if her dad was buying a new house, she said no. Then she revealed that he had been showing her pictures of houses for a trip abroad, buying her a bag for her things and telling her that I would be sad if I found out. He had been planning to take her out of the country without my knowledge. I felt like I was losing control of everything. I immediately contacted my lawyer, and we made sure to take precautions. I was no longer going to let him take my daughter out of the country. I wasn't going to let him continue this deceitful plan. Fast forward to today, and I'm relieved to say that things have settled down somewhat. After a lot of legal action, we were able to prevent the abduction. My ex has been investigated, and I now have sole custody of my daughter, at least temporarily. He can still visit her on weekends, but he can't take her anywhere. The investigation is ongoing, and my daughter continues therapy, which will help her process everything that's happened. This experience has been exhausting and scary, but I am so thankful to have the strength to protect my daughter and move on with my life. I will never get back with that man, and I will never let his mother tear us apart again.